Over the years, we've sort of developed this phrase, the science of good seating, because there is a science involved. It's not simple. It's something that many people take for granted, that we would sit on anything. And when we book these seminars, or you come along to the seminars, no one ever asks, what would you like to sit on? How high do you want your chairs? How wide do you want them? We just make do, because we can make do. And the risk of getting it wrong is quite serious. So there's a process, a thought process and a physical process we really need to go through if we're assessing for products. And this sort of sums it up. The seating really does take more effort than we think. So here we go. I just really want to take a look, first of all, some of the advantages, the benefits of good seating. And we'll look at the flip side of that in a moment. And the first one of these is maintaining the body shape. And many years ago, when I first came into this industry, I was probably a little bit naive, and I had a phone call to go out and see a client, and they said, we have this chair, the client's been using it now for probably 12 to 15 years. It's fantastic, and we want a replacement for it. Asking the questions, do you know the name of the chair, does it have serial numbers, and none of that was available. So I went out and had a look at this chair. And I was really shocked when I got there. It was a tubular steel chair, and it had a meshing over the top. There was no defined seat, back, arms. And so I was trying to be a little bit cautious and asking why they liked the chair so much. And they said she's really comfortable in it. She sat in that chair for around 3 hours, 4 times a week in the morning, and she'll go back to the centre in the afternoon 2 days a week. So over this 10 to 12 year period, she spent a huge amount of time sat in what I felt was a really inappropriate chair. And when we started to assess her, the first thing I noticed, she actually had a fixed kyphotic curve of the spine. And it was absolutely no wonder that sitting in a chair that was actually net-shaped, providing no support at all, and then suddenly we're out of our comfort zone. What we want to do is be able to manage posture, manage pressure, but as soon as we have fixed contractures, we then come into that non-comfortable side. We then have to accommodate what's there, because we're never ever going to get the flexibility back. Seating can provide a more active, a more social lifestyle. Many of you who work in the care of the elderly environments you go into, that many of the elderly folk don't want to go into the day centre or the day room. There's often some fantastic activities going on, participating in music and exercise and dance programs. But because their posture is so poor, one, they feel they don't want to go in there with that poor posture. And secondly, one of the really important factors is that posture is directly related to function. Today, we could have all led on the floor, we could have all stood up, but we would have become very, very uncomfortable very quickly. And if we can't adopt the correct posture for an activity, suddenly we will find a lot of the things we like to do, or we need to do, become very, very difficult, if not impossible to do. So seating can provide that better lifestyle. And certainly, it's a proven case today that providing good seating, whether it be static seating, wheelchair seating, but the right products, it does allow a faster and better recuperation from illness. And a classic example of that, if someone suffers a dense stroke, 10 or 15 years ago, that patient would like to have been nursed or convalesced for a period of time till they felt the risk or a life-threatening risk of the stroke had elapsed before they started any sort of rehabilitation program. Today, the earlier we can mobilize people, the better, the more likelihood is there for a more full recovery. And to be able to do that, you can't get out of bed and sit on a standard chair. We often need the chair to provide externally what is lacking and limited internally. So it will assist in a faster or a better recovery from certain illnesses. And something we're going to talk in a little bit more detail is the prevention of pressure-related ulcers. So I'll just leave that subject there at the moment. Fatigue management is also a very important issue. I don't know how many people have been here for 2 seminars continuously. It becomes uncomfortable sat in these chairs. You start to feel pain in your buttocks. Your brain is telling you, I need to do something, I need to move. And it's not long sitting, although we use it as a resting position, does take a lot of effort. It does become tiring. And we can look at ways that we can manage fatigue, and we'll come on to that a little bit later on. It's seldom one issue that will resolve the postural issues that someone may have. They're all interrelated. We have to look at each one of these in turn, and we'll do that as we progress. But first, I just want to look at some of the issues associated with incorrect sitting posture. And the first one I generally put up is difficulty in getting up. because once we lose the ability to self-transfer, our lives are significantly changed, and often changed forever. But equally, on the other side of the scale, the cost of care will increase dramatically. And often, it may be the simple case that providing a product that allows the user to get in and out of the chair easier, or the ability to do it, is a good investment. I have another little story. I was called out to see an elderly couple. The wife was the primary carer for her husband, but his wife had developed some back problems, very uncomfortable, started to find it difficult getting in and out of a chair. So we were looking for a solution. We found a solution. The solution cost £2,200. The therapist I was dealing with said, this is not going to happen. We will not authorise this sort of expenditure on a chair. It's okay, that's fine if that's in place. What are the alternatives? The alternatives were, the likelihood is the husband and wife will go into some elderly care facility. There was a risk they would go into separate establishments. And how far does £2,200 go in caring for people, or two separate people? You'd be lucky to get a fortnight's care out of it. And I know it's extremely difficult trying to manage budgets cost effectively because the NHS and various other types are so fragmented, but these chairs, the seating that you provide is often a very good investment, and it will save money in the long term. So difficulty in getting up. Unable to function correctly. Now, if you feel like getting involved in a very quick exercise just to prove this fact, that we all like to do various things, and we all have to do various things. And one of the things that is essential for life, we need to keep ourselves hydrated and nourished. And if we're not able to do that, our health will start to spiral, and we'll become ill very, very quickly. Now, recently in the papers, there was lots of major headlines about the number of people who were dying through dehydration in hospitals. And what's next to every bed on their bedside locker? There's a jug of water. We have the fluid within arm's reach from them, but if drinking is uncomfortable, difficult to do, the likelihood is it's not going to happen. It highlights the point that function is actually related to posture. And if we can provide the posture that allows drinking, eating, swallowing, breathing easier and natural, it can be done for the provision of good seating. Irritated tissue, we'll talk about later about shearing, friction, direct interface pressure. They all occur through the provision of poor seating. And I will show you a quick slide of some of the horrendous wounds that people get through inappropriate or poor posture. I put back pain, but it's often any muscular pain that when we go out and we purchase domestic furniture at home, often one of the first things we do is we feel how soft and squidgy it is, how comfortable is it going to be. Now, soft and squidgy is not good at managing posture. And if you want to try this yourself at home, find a favourite program, 30 minutes long, sit in your sofa at home in what we class as the optimal seating position. Your feet on the floor, your ankles, knees and pelvis at 90 degrees. In most cases, it'll be very difficult to do because three-piece suites, the seat length is far too long. It encourages you to sit in poor posture, but try it. And find out how long it is before your mind's veering away from this program you like and you're thinking about, I'm really uncomfortable here, I need to do something about it. So soft and squidgy is not the answer. You need some sort of firmer materials within the chair to help you manage posture. But obviously, as we come on to it, comfort is really important. We need to also prevent against falls. And I was reading a government website recently, and I was horrified that every 7 minutes, someone will accidentally fall at home, which requires hospital treatment. And as a result of that, within the 2-year period, 50% of those people who had that fall and were hospitalised will die, either as a direct consequence of the fall or it will be a contributing factor. And I don't know, many people who may have been noticed, so 15 years ago, when I was going out to carry out assessments, it wasn't unordinary to see someone sat in a chair with a big white sheet tied around their waist and tied around the chair. Now, is that because that was the only appropriate seating they had, that they could get someone out of bed into a functional position? Or was it the case that it kept them contained. They didn't need a lot of help and support. And I'll leave you to make your mind up on what the case is. Regardless of that, it's an absolute no-no now. You can't do that. We can't restrain folk. And so we then have to look at the seating system that will provide prevention. It will reduce the risk of people falling. Certainly our elderly folk, they have brittle bones, they have skin like tissue paper. A little fall at the height of a seat can be very dangerous for them. Equally, we have to look at the positioning of the head. The head too far back or too far forward will really disrupt the ability to feed, drink and breathe correctly and easily. Seating assessments, providing the right product does not always necessitate a huge bill at the end of the day. Often people are referred for an assessment to have a look at their seating, perhaps recommend for more appropriate seating. There are various elements we need to look at, and some of those are not going to cost a lot of money. And a huge percentage of the problem we have with seating is the size of the chair. That we'll look at some examples at the moment, but you probably feel it yourself that if the chair is too low, too high, it's too wide or too narrow, you're not going to be comfortable for long. And it may be the case that when we get a referral, or we have to assess for that, simply by raising the height of the chair may solve the issue. There are many fantastic chairs on the market now which are multi-adjustable. And it may be a case, all we need to do is reconfigure the size of the chair for the user. Weight distribution is critically important. The seats you're sat in at the moment, most of your weight is going to go through your thighs and buttocks. If you're lucky, there may be a little bit going through your feet. It's not healthy. And this is why our brain tells us we need to change our position. We're uncomfortable. And why? Because our blood flow is being restricted. And we'll look at the dangers of that as we move on a little bit later in. So we try to distribute weight more effectively. And we go back to function and posture. And what we need to do here is often look at what is absolutely necessary function, and what functions would we like to either reintroduce or introduce into people's lives. And if we want to do that, we must provide the tools for them to be able to adopt the posture to participate in that activity or function. And we can get all the four top ones right, but if that product is uncomfortable, then no one's going to want to sit in it. I have a very sad story. A few years ago, I was called out to do an assessment in a nursing home which specialised for people with Huntington's disease. And they had a gentleman in there. He'd been in there about 3.5 years. And more recently, they set up a little IT suite, and they had a couple of computers, and they have a switching system. And this guy wrote this letter. And it was about when he came into the nursing home. Everything right took place, that he was assessed. He was assessed for a chair, but they provided a chair which they thought was great for him. In fact, he felt it was the most uncomfortable thing in his life, and his life was a living hell. He knew when he woke up in the morning that he was going to be put in that chair for the majority of the day. So he spent all his time and all his efforts trying to throw himself out onto the floor, because that's where he got his respite. You may be one step ahead of me here, but what were the carers going to do? Poor old Mr. Smith, he's out of his chair again. Let's put him back in his lovely, comfortable chair. And so his life went on and on and on until he was able to communicate that through this small IT system and a switching system. I sort of sat there in this waiting room, which is going and thinking, wow, how would you hate to get up every morning? It's like Groundhog Day, and knowing your life is going to be uncomfortable, and all you're going to wait to do is get yourself out of that product. It can happen if we don't get the assessment right. But when looking for specialist seating, we can address the need of the whole size issue in a number of different ways. Many manufacturers will manufacture products in maybe 4 or 5 sizes, and it may be appropriate that we get the closest size fit and order that chair. And in many cases, that's enough. In many cases, it's not. We can make bespoke seating for someone. Great solution for today, but we can't guarantee how that product is going to be tomorrow, next week, and next year. Many of the cases we deal with are progressive, and they progress very rapidly. So it's not always a good solution. We also have to look about the recyclability of a product, that if someone has used it for a short period of time, it then becomes unsuitable for them, they often go back into social service loan stores. And if you've spent a lot of money on a bespoke chair, you're then looking for someone of the same size, with the same seating needs, the postural management required. And often, those bespoke chairs spend the rest of their life sat on a shelf till someone decides to throw them out. Two other options, we can use wedges and shapes and pillows to take up any space in them. We often see that in hospitals. It's not unusual to see someone sat with 4 or 5 big white pillows, propping them up in an appropriate chair. A little bit of movement, they move, they fall out, it's really inappropriate. The best solution by far, if you can do it, is to get a chair that is multi-adjustable. It will provide maximum postural support and postural management today, tomorrow, next year. It can be reconfigured for the same user. It can also be recycled very effectively through social lifestyles, through a nursing home, or through any establishment by simply reconfiguring it for their use. Each of those options has a corresponding price tag to it. And the most appropriate option is obviously the most expensive if you look at it in cash for a single product. But it's often a very good investment. If you can pay a little bit more for it, you can put some future-proofing into that chair. It becomes more effective. Someone can use it as opposed to it sat on a shelf waiting to find someone of the right size or the right needs. I want to look at 2 examples of poor posture. And the first one of these, as I said, is going to be posterior pelvic tilt. My estimation is that as a seating company, 75 to 80% of the people we see on a daily basis have elements of either posterior pelvic tilt or pelvic obliquity we'll look at in a moment. This is what people would determine as the optimum seating position. It's a fairly upright position, it's a very functional position. I couldn't sit like that for any given period of time, and certainly most of the people we deal with can't sit in that posture. Very soon they will start to move in inappropriate posture. The thing we have to do is to try and understand why that occurs. And there are some reasons, I won't go into them all today, but very simply, if a chair is too high for the user and they can't put their feet on the floor, we all seek stability through our feet. And often what you'll find someone sliding down into the chair, searching for the floor. Inevitably, if that happens, it's the heel that finds contact with the floor, and often only the heel. How many of us cross our legs when we sit? And if we've got one bony prominence of one heel, and then the weight of another foot on top of it, we're starting to overload a very small surface-bearing part of the body. It becomes extremely dangerous. We may be able to eliminate it or reduce the risk by adjusting the height correctly. If the seat is too short or too long, it also has serious consequences. If it's too short, we have a lot of the length of the thigh unsupported, and therefore weight is being transferred into a smaller part of the body. If the seat length is too long, then our knees are not going to naturally break where they're designed to. The only way that's going to happen is to slide our bums forward in our chair to allow our legs to go over the edge of the seat. But by doing that, we can start to see here unsupported areas of the body. And as we slide forward, notice the position of the spine. We start to develop this kyphotic curve. And by doing so, there is very little contact between the back and the seat of the chair. And very, very prone to these little pinpricks of area of pressure going down the spine. Long, unprolonged seating in that position, you run a high risk of this then becoming a fixed contracture. And again, we're out of what we want to do managing posture, we then have to accommodate what we're left with. And this is a good example of how the head will naturally realign itself over the pelvis. And if we can identify why these are what's happening, what's causing this to happen, we can rectify it by looking for the right tools. And I'm not here today to show you what seating will do, but finding a chair that we can change the seat height, change the seat length, perhaps provide better support at the back and the head. It will reduce the risk and stop this posterior tilt happening. The important factor is being able to identify what is causing it, and then looking for the tools that will allow us to reduce the risk of that happening. Similar things can be said for pelvic obliquity. On the left-hand side, this is really where we want to sit. That the little bony parts of our bums, our ischial tuberosities, we should have the weight evenly balanced on both our ischial tuberosities. And it doesn't take much lateral movement to change that weight. You might just want to move a couple of degrees left and right, and you can feel how much difference that's making. Huge amount of our body weight is going in through our buttocks and thighs, and if we start to disrupt that by going to this pelvic obliquity, we're overloading a smaller part of our body with a huge amount of weight, and we'll see some of the results of what can happen. Also look at the shape of the spine. On the left-hand side, we've got a good midline spine, which is what we're looking for, trying to create. On the left-hand side, just by that pelvic obliquity happening, we've then got a more lateral misshaping of the spine, something called scoliosis, which again, long-term, unprevented or unrelieved seating, the likelihood is that could go into a fixed contracture. This is in the optimum seating position. We should be looking for around 75% of our body weight going through our thighs and buttocks. We should have around 19% going through our feet. And if you cast your minds back to posterior pelvic tilt, if our feet are unsupported, where is that 19% of the body weight going? It doesn't disappear. It has to go somewhere. It will be loaded onto the thighs and buttocks. And we're then getting towards maximum body weight through a very small surface area of the body. Very little actually goes through the back and arms until we start doing dynamic things like tilt in space, back recline, or perhaps elevating leg rests. But what we need to do is try to even out or make that weight distribution more even over the body and reduce the risk of pressure damage happening. Very quickly, some of the tools you may be looking for in seating to do that. And the first one is something called tilt in space. I'm led to believe that tilt in space derived from something called orientation in space, which came from the 1990 space shuttle seats. That it was the ability to move someone from a fairly upright functional position to a more reclined position without flexing any part of the body. And that's the beauty about tilt in space as opposed to back angle recline. It allows you to do that. And at the same time, we're also distributing the body weight more effectively. Leg rest elevation. It's been around functional seating for many, many years. It's great for helping circulation, helping edema. If you have a standard elevating leg raise, it's obviously pivoted below the seat. And as you articulate it in upward motion, particularly if you've got a foot plate fitted, it has the action of actually reducing the lower leg measurement. Often we have people being cared for at home. The carers will be in twice, maybe 3 times a day. They're actively encouraged to change their posture. And if we're asking someone to elevate their legs with this pivotal action, it's going to have a negative effect. An arcing leg rest action will maintain that lower leg measurement, and it won't just raise up, but it will go in an arcing action. It's a very, very small point, but it's a hugely beneficial point, certainly for posture, pressurement, or relieving the risk of serious damage happening. Sit to stand, rise recline type chairs. And we spoke about the importance, if we lose our ability to self-transfer, our lives are changed significantly. There are some fantastic chairs on the market that will allow this to happen, the rise recline type of chairs. Unfortunately, they're not always the best chairs for posture and pressure management. Their mobility isn't affected. And it's seldom that we will get our criteria lists and get 10 out of 10. This is what compromise often has to happen. Today, we haven't overcome the fact of getting really good postural pressure management chairs to be integrated with a good rise or recline facility. A lot of it comes down to costs. Theoretically, it can be done, but the more you reduce the size of actuators and things, so the cost increases. And if you're providing a solution that is way outpriced, the benefits of it, it's not worth manufacturers, designers going that far. So often we have to look at compromise in this. Back action recline, again, very, very common feature on a lot of chairs. It's great for those people who've got fairly good muscle control. They're able to control their position, perhaps want to nap or rest in the chair. But often what you're doing, by opening that seat and back angle, you're creating an open invitation to slide down to this posterior pelvic tilt. And often it's worth looking to, can you have a seat that will change angle in line with the back recline? Or in fact use it in conjunction with tilt in space. Just be a little bit aware about it because it can have some negative effects as well as very positive. I want to talk a little bit about the material of the chair because it has some major functions. We start on the first one that you're going to be likely to pay a sizable sum of money for a good seating system. And what we want from that is durability, some value for money. So we want fabrics that are going to be durable in the first instance, but at the same time, they need to be comfortable. Thankfully, gone are the days where you had a choice of 4 vinyls that didn't stretch. They were extremely cold in the winter. They were extremely hot and sticky in the summer. There are lots of good fabrics out there, so we can start to combine durability with comfort. Many of the people we deal with have a naturally higher body temperature than what we would class as normal. And again, often to provide good postural management, you start to cocoon someone in a chair. You bring a headrest around to support them, you bring the shoulders around to support them. And all that time, there's going to be less air flowing around the body. We're going to increase the body temperature, and therefore there's likelihood of more perspiration. And when we look at causes of pressure-related injuries, the fourth largest contributing factor is moisture. There are materials on the market now that people refer to them as breathable. They're vapor permeable. You wouldn't want to put them over your mouth and nose and try and breathe through them, but there is an element of air that will rise through those, and it will help to keep the body temperature down. So it's always worth looking or asking the question when looking at fabrics, not only how pretty it is, but is it vapor permeable? Because it may help you. Today, I feel that infection control is probably the strongest market driver that we have. Nothing will get through a hospital without someone ticking the box from infection control. The cleaning substances used today to eradicate things like MRSA, C. difficile, are chlorine-based. They're corrosive fluids. And many materials, including metalwork and finishings on chair, will be corroded by the cleaning substance we need to use. And again, it's a question we need to ask. Will this material stand up to a chlorine-based cleaning agent or an alcohol-based cleaning agent? Many will now, but equally, many won't. In a short period of time, they can become discolored, they will be weakened, and they will be damaged. We have a legal obligation to fulfill the fire regulations or the fire standards. And without going into too much depth about those, there are various different standards. We buy furniture at home, which are domestic regulations. They're often referred to as cigarette and match, because we see that little picture of the cigarette with a line put through it. That's absolutely fine for us at home. That if we move into any care establishment, whether it be, elderly facilities, hospitals, military installations, North Sea oil rigs, we have to reach a more critical or a better protection for fire resistance. And it's often referred to as CRIB 5 or ignition source 5. It doesn't mean they won't burn, because they will. Foams, materials will burn at some stage. It's all determining on when you introduce the naked flame to the product or to the material, how long it takes to combust. Is all the test is around. And when people refer to a crib, it's purely a little piece of wood that they use to introduce that wood to it. But again, ask the question. There are many reputable manufacturers of products out there. They will only use ignition source 5 materials. Reasoning behind that, if we're assessing someone at home, we can adhere to domestic regulations. But if they have to move into a care facility, legally, they're not able to take that product with them because it doesn't meet the fire retardancy standards. And it may be just worth, even if it's going to cost you an extra £5 or £10 to get a CRIB 5 or ignition source 5 tested material so that chair can travel, you're not going to look for a whole new chair. Tactile response is always very important. And Americans refer to it as the hand, how it feels. I've had examples, you're hoisting someone down into a vinyl product and suddenly you get the skin contact on something hot or cold, they suddenly go into this rigid position, they extend. You're never going to assess them. You need to let time to calm that down. It needs to be soft, it needs to be inviting, but also fulfill the other requirements of the material. Preferences are probably the hardest thing to overcome. But it's personal preferences. We don't all like the same thing. And I've been out many, many times, and I've experienced with other people that you go in, you assess a client, you understand the needs, you have all the answers, you think, oh no, I'm going to bring this product in, you're really proud of it, and there's someone stood at the door saying, it's not coming in here, look how ugly it is, look at the colour of the product. We can be sympathetic, and if the chair is going to be manufactured specifically for them, then we can get around that. But I was speaking to 2 occupational therapists at the last OT conference, and they both sit on the panel and sign off expenditure. And they said, yeah, we are generally very sympathetic to people's preferences. However, today, if there's a gentleman that needs a chair, and it's pink and it's floral, we have it on the shelves in the stores, it's a case of take it or leave it. And that's where we find ourselves today. Budgets are very tight, and we can't always be as sympathetic as we'd like to be on personal preferences. But they are hugely important. If we were to prioritize our priority list, it will be completely different to someone at home prioritizing their list. And the likelihood is their preferences would come to the top. Everyone's seen the Duracell bunny. We'd all like to be like Duracell Bunny. We can come to work, we can work really hard, we can go home in the evening, but still have some energy to enjoy life. Take the dog for a walk, play with the kids, do whatever you'd like to do. Unfortunately, many people that we deal with don't have that ability. Their battery level as such is very, very low. It's a small bundle of energy. And once that energy has been expelled, then it takes a long time to recharge them. And what we don't want to do, and I see it all the time, is elderly folk or disabled folk sat in a chair using every bit of their effort to simply sit upright. What we want to do is take that away. And again, this phrase, provide externally what is lacking and limited internally. And by doing that, perhaps that person could go into the day room and go along to a sing-along or do something more enjoyable. Look out the window, see the changing seasons, or be pushed down to a patio area and feel the breeze. All these things we take for granted. It can be done through the provision of well-designed, well-manufactured seating products. I want a quick look at pressure management. And if you haven't seen pressure ulcers, they're not areas of swollen, pinkish tissue. They're horrendous wounds. They rob people of their mobility. They put people into extreme pain. So that's the only one I've got of those. I just want to throw some statistics. Latest government figures would indicate that 412,000 people will develop a pressure ulcer for the first time. That figure is almost identical to last year, the year before that, and unfortunately my thoughts are it's probably going to be the same as next year and the year after that. Why? We have a huge amount of money being spent on education. We have a huge amount of money being spent on preventative measures. It still happens. I was at a conference last week in Wales, and the statistics from the clinical nurse manager said that 26% of Welsh population who go into a community hospital will suffer a degree of pressure damage. Horrendous figures, 1 in 4. You know, we think it's going to happen to the odd few people. There's a huge amount of this happening. If we break that down a little bit, that 25% of those are grade 3 or grade 4 ulcers, examples of what we've shown before. So hugely serious. If for 1 minute we just park the robbing of mobility, the pain, discomfort and suffering, and look at the financial implications, because there's a reason for it. The NHS will spend around about £2 billion, and the important part here is treating pressure ulcers. Most of that money is spent on the nursing of the patient. It doesn't take into effect that someone coming in for elective surgery, developing a pressure ulcer, theatre schedules have to be changed, bed blocking occurs, litigation happens. It's very, very difficult. I've managed to achieve it. Find out what the true figure is of litigation through pressure ulcers in the UK, but it's vast. So this figure, 2.1 billion, could be 4 billion. It could be 5 billion. I don't know, and I can't give you an example on that. It's all very interesting, but it's not specifically meaningful. Where it does become meaningful, a grade 1 pressure ulcer, the lowest you can get, will cost just over £1,000 to nurse or to treat. If you had that £1,000, you could buy 4, 5, 6 very good pressure cushions, which allow you to help to reduce that risk happening. There are very few pressure cushions that's going to cost anything like £1,000. And if we look at a grade 4 pressure ulcer, we're talking at £10,500. Just think what you could equip someone with: a bed, a mattress, a chair, a cushion, a hoist, a commode. All of those things can be afforded within this bracket of cost. We use a phrase randomly in many cases: prevention is better than cure. And in this case, it really is that if you can afford to spend a little bit more money by using better materials, pressure relieving materials within a product, it will pay dividends. Again, it's a good investment. So why do they happen despite all this money being spent? I'll go through very quickly some of these. There's 2 categories. First one we put up here is intrinsic causes. Now, as a company, personally, and many things we do, we totally ignore these. And the reason behind that is not that we just don't want to deal with them. We have absolutely no influence over these. If we're assessing a client, we can't determine their age, whether they've been a lifelong smoker, whether they've had previous pressure ulcers, whether they're extremely ill. They're facts. There are many people here that you may be able to influence those, but when we're looking at posture and pressure management, we can't. So what we categorize, we import is these elements, and they're shear or pressure, shear, friction, and moisture. Now, I'll try and explain those in a slightly weird way. that most of us have probably been to a water park and gone down these flumes. They work extremely well because there's an interface between yourself and the plastic flume, and that's water. So there is no direct interface pressure, or very little of it, because it allows you to flow down. Imagine yourself at the top of a slide in your cozies, and we turn the water off. The first thing we're going to get is direct interface pressure going through a small part of our body. And the others won't happen unless there is direct interface pressure. And think of yourself, I'm really determined I'm going to go down this water slide, so you nudge yourself forward, and the first thing that will happen, your body weight, your internal body, will want to go down the slide, but that interface of your skin against the slide is going to stop that happening. And what you feel is that pulling sensation of your skin being stretched. Things that will happen here is either the corpuscles, the blood flow through your body, those corpuscles will be stretched so finely, blood will not flow through them, or they're going to be torn and there'll be a localized bleed. The result of either of those two will be a loss of blood flow through the body, and therefore the tissue is not being nourished. The toxins are not going to be taken away. The risk is then we'll start to get the skin necrosis happening. The skin will rot. The pressure ulcer will develop. If we go that stage further, we've got the shearing happening, but you're still determined to go down this slide. You're not going to go down it smoothly. You're going to go down in a sort of more jagged sort of matter. And that will start causing what we call friction. And those wounds will more present themselves more like a blister, a larger shape, as opposed to the example I've shown before. And moisture. We spoke about moisture previously, that it is important. It's the fourth largest contributing factor. But we can address all four of those quite simply through the provision of good seating. So who's at risk? And I'm going to go put this list up. Elderly, those who are ill, or those that are infirm, people who have mobility problems, incontinence, malnourishment, dehydration. They're all contributing factors. And I presented a similar presentation to the Care Show, who were all care home owners. And someone stood up and said, that's everyone in my home. Absolutely right. It's not a small spectrum of people that are at risk. It's a huge amount of people. Just the process of us getting old puts us into a higher category. And we need to treat it in that way. And that everyone, or more or less everyone in a care facility, elderly folk, disabled folk, they are at a higher risk. So get away from thinking there's a small spectrum of people at risk. Huge amounts of people are that we deal with on a daily basis. We've spoken about the different categories of risk and why they occur. We then have to present ourselves thinking, okay, direct interface pressure. That is a contributing factor to pressure damage. What can I do to reduce that risk? The golden rule is maximum body weight over the greatest possible surface area. Or look at it slightly differently. When I was growing up, in sort of, I think, the 70s, what on these variety shows you saw very regularly was the Indian guy with his bed of nails. And he would take this bed of nails in. Not only would he lie on all these jagged nails, he would have a paving slab or something put on his stomach, and someone would smash it with a sledgehammer. And he gets up, absolutely no damage. A little bit of marking on the back. Why? Because even though those nails were sharp, there was enough of them in his bed of nails to distribute that weight evenly. If we would have gone behind him and taken out a number of these nails and repeated the exercise, the likelihood is we're going to seriously damage the guy or he would die. And it's no different to us distributing body weight in a chair or in a bed. It's reducing that risk, going back to the golden rule, maximum body weight over the largest possible surface area. When we look at shearing and friction, how can we stop shearing and friction taking place? We've looked at posterior pelvic tilt, the body sliding down into a chair. It happens very commonly. And equally, one of the resulting factors is someone will come along and say, poor old Mrs. Smith, let's put her back into a good position. And you get a double whammy of shearing and friction taking place. We have to look at ways that we're going to address that. And that'll be through transfers and various other elements we look at. And moisture. Think about the materials that are available to us. If there's a way that we can provide posture without cocooning someone into a chair, look at breathable, air-permeable fabrics, which will help you in that quest. Let's look at some common areas where pressure ulcers can develop. In reality, they will develop on any part of the body. The most common areas are our bony prominences. And we look at us in a supine position, the back of the head, the shoulders, the lower back and buttocks and our heels, because they're bony prominences, they're small areas with a lot of weight going through them. And if I put up the location, the frequency in which these occur, it's absolutely no surprise that the sacrum is one of the vulnerable areas. Not only does a huge amount of weight go through it in inappropriate seating, it will suffer shearing and friction quite readily. The heels, we spoke about one of the risks of sitting in a chair where it's too high. And so we search and slide down for our feet to be supported. And again, a little bony heel taking a huge amount of body weight, it's a recipe for disaster. Buttocks, elbows and hips, again, all bony prominences of the body. So we have to protect all of those by distributing this weight more effectively. So reducing the risk, we must be risk aware. I think the legal obligation is that within 6 hours of the first instance of care, a risk assessment should be carried out. And this will tell us what at-risk category someone is at. So when we're going to assess for a bed, a chair, it doesn't really matter, we understand the risk we're dealing with, and we need to then provide the tools which are going to reduce that risk. And again, it's no different. Increasing the body weight over a larger surface area, reducing shear and friction, we can have those in mind. Pressure ulcers can develop in a very short period of time. And if we're going to assess someone for perhaps an hour or more in a product, you're increasing that risk. Pressure ulcers can develop in a short period of time like that. Many people ask, can I borrow this chair for the weekend so I can assess it in my own time? If it's not right and it hasn't got the right pressure management materials in it, there is a risk they will develop a pressure ulcer purely on a weekend of trying on a product. We have to be very, very careful about this. We have to understand how people are being positioned in a chair or repositioned. And I gave you the example of someone sliding down into a posterior pelvic tilt and sliding them back up. There are some poorly designed seats around that often back angle adjustment. You may have experienced yourself. As you recline back into a chair and then you bring yourself into upright position, you feel your clothes being tugged and stretched because shearing and friction is happening purely through the movement of the chair. We need to reduce these or eliminate them altogether. Making sure we distribute body weight in the most effective way possible. Pelvic stability is often one of the key issues here. If we can stabilize the pelvis, either through the dynamics of a seating system, through a profiling bed, fantastic. We may have to use things like lap straps, pelvic positioners, perhaps knee blocks and foot sandals and things. It can all be done. But if the pelvis is stabilized, the body's not going to go anywhere. There's not going to be any shearing or friction. So it's often a key to look for. If we can stabilize it in some way, we're halfway there. We should also look at the materials, and we spoke about external materials, but also looking at what the internal materials are. Are we using water, gel, air, foam? There's a multitude of different materials. Some are better than others, but we have to be really aware because someone has to make a decision on what's right and what's wrong. This is an interesting slide. I came across this recently, and it just indicates that a small measurement, in this particular case, it's the seat height or the foot plate height. Look on the left-hand side here, we can see where the feet are protected or on the floor. On the left-hand side is what we measure pressure in. It's something called milligrams of mercury. We don't need to understand that. What we need to understand is a low number is good, a high number is bad. But as we move the foot plate away from where it is, so the further it gets away from supporting the feet effectively, look how much we increase the pressure readings. And visually, it's very difficult to see. Is that foot really supporting the weight? You know, how much difference does a centimetre make? We then have to physically check, feel how much weight has been transferred through it. But the consequences, you know, are well explained here. 1 or 2 centimetres can make a huge amount of difference to reducing the risk. This is a statement which I can't argue with it. There are many different types of mattresses, cushions that can help reduce pressure on the bony parts of the body. And it can help prevent pressure ulcers. Someone has to make a selection from the hundreds that are available, what is right. What I find disagreeable, no seat cushion has been shown to perform better than another. In plain terms, I think it's absolute rubbish, because a £2 piece of upholstered foam is not going to protect as well as good, well-tested gels, foams, air, lots of other substances they use. So I would disagree with that. And if that was the case, we could all provide solutions or reduce the risk with a £5 investment. It's not going to happen. We have to invest a certain amount of money to get that protection. This is a random picture. I just downloaded it from some website. But what I wanted to emphasize is we're all different. We're all different size, we're all different shape, we're different ages, we have different seating abilities and needs, and therefore there is no single solution to the problem. So we need to look and we need to be aware of the solutions out there. I think more importantly, some of you may be able to see clearer than others. If you look at the right-hand side of the slide here, we see the two elderly ladies on the right-hand side and the gentleman in the foreground in the wheelchair. They've all got posterior pelvic tilt. And after I looked at this, every time I go into an elderly care environment now, I just glance around the day room. And you'll see the majority of people will be in a posterior pelvic tilt. It'll be brought up there. There's very little weight going through the legs, huge amount through the heels. The heads on all of those three people have realigned themselves over the pelvis. They will all be sat in a kyphotic curve. It's not to say wherever this is incorrect. They might have addressed that when we go out, but it's very, very common. The important factor is we have to deal with everyone as being unique because we are different, and there's going to be a different solution for everyone we deal with. Thankfully, there are lots of fantastic manufacturers of products out there, and people have a huge amount of knowledge who can help us in that task.